Jasmine Washington, a 28-year-old black tech billionaire, watches in disbelief as armed air marshals storm the luxury jet cabin. Her fellow passengers point accusingly at her while the elderly white woman who stole her seat smirks victoriously. The pilot announces, "This flight isn't going anywhere." Before we dive into this shocking story, where are you watching from today? Hit that like button and subscribe if you've ever experienced or witnessed unfair treatment while traveling. How would you react if someone took your assigned seat and then tried to have you removed from the plane? Let's find out what happened next in this unbelievable true story. Jasmine Washington wasn't born into wealth or privilege. Her story began in a modest neighborhood in Chicago, where tragedy struck early when she lost both parents in a car accident at age 12. Her grandmother, Martha Washington, took her in despite struggling financially on a teacher's assistant salary. Martha recognized something special in young Jasmine, a brilliant mind that deserved every opportunity to flourish. "My grandmother sold her house, worked 2 jobs, and sacrificed everything so I could attend the best schools," Jasmine once revealed in a rare interview. "She taught me that intelligence without compassion is worthless." That sacrifice paid off. Jasmine's exceptional aptitude for mathematics and computer science earned her a full scholarship to MIT at just 16 years old. While other students socialized, Jasmine spent countless nights coding in her dorm room, developing what would eventually become Neurotech, an artificial intelligence platform that revolutionized medical diagnostics. By 21, she had secured her first million in venture capital funding. By 25, after Neurotech's groundbreaking algorithms helped detect early-stage cancer with unprecedented accuracy, Jasmine Washington became the youngest black female billionaire in American history. Forbes valued her company at $11 billion, but Jasmine maintained a surprisingly low profile. Despite her extraordinary wealth, Jasmine remained grounded. She drove a modest electric car, lived in a comfortable but not ostentatious home, and donated over 40% of her income to educational foundations for underprivileged youth. One of her peculiar habits, occasionally flying commercial instead of using her access to private jets. "I need to stay connected to reality," she explained to her close friend and personal assistant, Benjamin Hayes. "The moment I isolate myself completely is the moment I lose touch with the people my technology is supposed to help." Benjamin had worked alongside Jasmine since her early startup days, one of the few people who knew the woman behind the impressive resume. He understood her need for normalcy despite her extraordinary circumstances. Today's flight to Atlanta carried particular importance. Jasmine was heading to a meeting with healthcare conglomerate MediSolutions about a potential $500 million acquisition that would integrate her AI technology into hospitals nationwide. The deal represented not just money, but a chance to implement her life-saving technology at a scale that could help millions. "I've prepared all the documents," Benjamin told her as he helped organize her trip. "I wish I could be there, but my mother's surgery is tomorrow." "Family comes first, always," Jasmine insisted, squeezing his hand. "I'll manage this one solo." Though she projected confidence, Jasmine felt a flutter of anxiety. She rarely traveled without her small but efficient support team. Benjamin had booked her a first-class ticket on the morning flight to Atlanta, arranged for a car service, and reserved her usual suite at the Four Seasons. Everything should go smoothly. As her car pulled up to the departures terminal, Jasmine straightened her simple but elegant navy blazer, grabbed her leather laptop bag, and took a deep breath. The driver opened her door with a smile. "Have a good flight, Ms. Washington." The same couldn't be said for the airline staff. As Jasmine approached the priority check-in counter, the attendant barely glanced up from her computer. "Economy check-in is down that way," she said dismissively, pointing toward the longer line. "I'm flying first class," Jasmine replied, sliding her identification and booking confirmation across the counter. The attendant's expression shifted from disinterest to suspicion as she scrutinized the documents, then Jasmine's face, as if seeking evidence of fraud. After an uncomfortably long pause, she processed the boarding pass with pursed lips and returned Jasmine's documents without making eye contact. "Gate A14. Boarding in 90 minutes. No smile. No, enjoy your flight. Just the cold efficiency reserved for those presumed not to belong in premium spaces. Jasmine collected her things and walked toward security, accustomed to the subtle indignities that her success had never fully insulated her from. Her grandmother's words echoed in her mind, "No matter how high you climb, some people will only ever see the color of your skin." Little did she know that today, those prejudices would escalate into something far more sinister than just poor service. The VIP lounge at O'Hare International Airport offered a sanctuary of plush seating, complimentary refreshments, and attentive service, at least for most of its guests. As Jasmine approached the entrance, keycard in hand, the attendant's welcoming smile froze mid-formation. "Membership card and boarding pass, please," requested Gerald Hughes, the lounge attendant, his tone noticeably cooler than it had been for the white businessman who entered moments before. Jasmine produced both items promptly. "I'm flying to Atlanta, first class." Gerald examined her credentials with exaggerated thoroughness, turning the premium credit card that granted lounge access over several times as if searching for signs of forgery. "Is there a problem?" Jasmine asked, maintaining her composure despite the familiar feeling of unwarranted scrutiny. "Just following protocol, ma'am," Gerald replied, finally scanning her card with visible reluctance. "Security's been tight lately. I'm sure you understand." Once admitted, Jasmine selected a quiet corner seat with a view of the runway, opening her laptop to review her presentation for the upcoming meeting. She was deep in concentration when a security officer approached her. "Ms. Washington, we need you to come with us for additional screening." Jasmine glanced around the lounge. Dozens of travelers sat undisturbed with their belongings. Only she had been singled out. "May I ask why?" she questioned calmly. "Random selection, ma'am," the officer stated flatly, though nothing about the interaction felt random. At the secondary screening area, away from the main security checkpoint, Jasmine's carry-on was emptied item by item. Her laptop was swabbed for explosive residue. Her bottle of designer perfume was confiscated despite being within the size limit for liquids. "That's a $300 fragrance," Jasmine noted. "Should have checked it," the agent replied indifferently. When finally allowed to return to the lounge, Jasmine overheard snippets of conversation from nearby travelers. "How'd she afford first class?" a middle-aged man whispered to his companion, not bothering to lower his voice sufficiently. "Probably using someone else's miles. Or someone else's credit card," his companion snickered in response. Jasmine had grown accustomed to such assumptions throughout her career. Even in Silicon Valley, investors often mistook her for an assistant rather than the founder when she first walked into meetings. Her success had not exempted her from prejudice, it had simply changed its manifestation. From across the lounge, a woman in her 60s with immaculately styled silver hair watched Jasmine with undisguised suspicion. Eleanor Price adjusted her pearl necklace as she observed the young black woman typing on a high-end laptop. When Jasmine briefly stepped away to get coffee, Eleanor removed her phone from her designer handbag and made a call, speaking in hushed tones while keeping her eyes fixed on Jasmine's unattended belongings. When the boarding announcement for the Atlanta flight echoed through the lounge, Jasmine gathered her possessions. As a first-class passenger, she was entitled to priority boarding. However, as she approached the gate, Eleanor darted in front of her, jostling Jasmine's shoulder without apology. "First class and premier members now boarding," announced the gate agent. Eleanor presented her boarding pass to Rebecca Miller, the flight attendant checking documents at the gate. Rebecca beamed at the older woman. "Welcome aboard, Mrs. Price. So lovely to have you with us again." When Jasmine stepped forward next, Rebecca's warm demeanor cooled considerably. "Boarding pass, please," she requested, her tone businesslike. Jasmine presented her digital boarding pass. Rebecca examined it with excessive scrutiny, comparing Jasmine's face to her ID multiple times. "Is there a problem?" Jasmine asked. "Just being thorough," Rebecca replied. After several more seconds of inspection, she reluctantly waved Jasmine through. "Enjoy your flight." As Jasmine walked down the jet bridge, she noticed two security personnel speaking into their radios, their eyes following her progress. One of them spoke clearly enough for her to catch fragments: "Passenger in question, boarding now, keep an eye." A sense of unease settled over Jasmine as she approached the aircraft door. What should have been a routine business trip was accumulating strange, troubling interactions. Still, she attempted to dismiss her concerns as she prepared to board the plane that would take her to Atlanta. Perhaps the day would improve once she was airborne, settled in her seat with a glass of sparkling water and her presentation notes. She couldn't have been more wrong. Jasmine stepped onto the aircraft, nodding politely to the flight attendant positioned at the entrance. The first-class cabin gleamed with its spacious seats, ambient lighting, and the subtle scent of vanilla and citrus that the airline used to create a calming atmosphere. She made her way to seat 1A, the prime spot in first class with extra legroom and a window view. To her surprise, the seat was already occupied. Eleanor Price sat comfortably installed, arranging her personal items in the compartments as if she'd been assigned there. "Excuse me," Jasmine said politely. "I believe you're in my seat." "I'm 1A. Eleanor barely glanced up. "No, this is my seat. I have my boarding pass right here," Jasmine responded, displaying her digital ticket on her phone. "It clearly says 1A. Eleanor's lips tightened as she finally looked directly at Jasmine. "I always sit in 1A when I fly this route. I've been a platinum member for 15 years. "I understand, but today this seat was assigned to me," Jasmine explained, maintaining her professional tone despite the growing discomfort of standing in the aisle while other passengers boarded behind her. Rebecca Miller, the same flight attendant who had checked Jasmine's boarding pass with excessive scrutiny at the gate, approached with a frown. "Is there a problem here?" "This young woman is trying to take my seat," Eleanor declared before Jasmine could speak. "My boarding pass assigns me to 1A, Jasmine explained, showing Rebecca the evidence on her phone. Rebecca barely glanced at it. "Mrs. Price is one of our most valued customers. Perhaps there's been a system error. Let me check what other seats are available." "There's no error," Jasmine insisted firmly. "I booked this seat specifically, and the airline confirmed my assignment. I'm not trying to cause trouble, but I would like to sit in the seat I paid for." By now, other first-class passengers had begun to notice the exchange. Whispers and stares circulated through the cabin, predominantly from the older white passengers who seemed to automatically side with Eleanor. "She's making such a fuss over nothing," one man muttered to his companion. "Some people just don't know how to behave in first class," his seatmate replied, loud enough for Jasmine to hear. Jasmine took a deep breath, determined not to let the situation escalate unnecessarily. "May I speak with the captain, please?" Rebecca's expression tightened, but she nodded curtly and disappeared toward the cockpit. Moments later, she returned with Captain Douglas Peterson, a tall man with graying temples and an authoritative presence. "What seems to be the issue here?" he asked, his gaze immediately fixing on Jasmine rather than surveying the situation neutrally. Before Jasmine could explain, Eleanor interjected, "This woman is harassing me over a seat assignment. I've been flying this airline for decades, Captain, and I've never been treated so poorly. I simply want to sit in the seat I was assigned," Jasmine stated calmly, once again displaying her boarding pass. "Seat 1A. Captain Peterson gave the boarding pass a cursory glance. "I understand, miss, but Mrs. Price is a long-standing customer, and we try to accommodate our loyal passengers when possible. I'm also a customer who paid for this specific seat," Jasmine pointed out. Eleanor suddenly raised her voice, "I feel threatened. She's being aggressive toward me." Nothing in Jasmine's demeanor could reasonably be interpreted as threatening, yet Eleanor's performance had its intended effect. Other passengers began to murmur more loudly. The atmosphere in the cabin grew tense. A second flight attendant, Michael Thompson, joined the scene. After a brief whispered consultation with Rebecca, He turned to Jasmine with a placating smile. "Ma'am, to resolve this situation quickly, we have an available seat in economy class. We'd be happy to offer you a partial refund for the downgrade." Jasmine felt a surge of indignation. The suggestion that she should give up her rightfully purchased seat to accommodate someone else's entitlement struck at her core sense of dignity. This wasn't about comfort or status, it was about principle. "No, thank you," she replied firmly. "I purchased a first-class ticket with an assigned seat. That's where I'll be sitting today." Sensing the situation was at an impasse, Jasmine discreetly removed her phone and began recording the interaction. She had learned through experience that documentation often became necessary when facing discrimination. Captain Peterson noticed immediately. "Recording is not permitted on this aircraft for security reasons," he stated sharply. "Actually, FAA regulations don't prohibit passengers from recording if it doesn't interfere with crew member duties," Jasmine countered, her knowledge of aviation rules catching the captain off guard. "I'm simply documenting this interaction for my own records." The captain's face hardened. "This is delaying our departure. I need you to take an available seat immediately or we'll have to involve airport security." What would you do if you were in Jasmine's position? Would you stand your ground or accept the economy seat to avoid further conflict? Comment number 1 if you think she should refuse to move, or number 2 if you believe she should accept the alternative seat to avoid escalation. Don't forget to like and subscribe to see how this confrontation unfolds. Did Jasmine know something was terribly wrong, or was this just the beginning of her troubles? The answer might surprise you. The tense standoff in the first-class cabin had drawn the attention of every passenger on board. Jasmine remained composed but resolute, refusing to surrender the seat she had legitimately purchased. Captain Peterson, visibly frustrated by her knowledge of regulations and unwillingness to back down, was about to respond when Eleanor suddenly gasped dramatically. "My watch," she exclaimed, her voice pitched to carry throughout the cabin. "My diamond watch is gone." All eyes turned to Eleanor as she made a show of frantically searching her wrist, her handbag, and the seat pocket in front of her. The expensive timepiece she claimed to have been wearing moments ago had mysteriously vanished. "I had it when I boarded," Eleanor insisted, her eyes narrowing as they settled on Jasmine. "She was standing right next to me. She must have taken it while creating this distraction about the seat." "That's absurd," Jasmine responded, stunned by the accusation. "I didn't touch your watch or anything else belonging to you." Rebecca, the flight attendant who had consistently sided with Eleanor, immediately began looking around Jasmine. "Maybe we should check your pockets and bag, just to clear things up," she suggested with thinly veiled suspicion. "Absolutely not," Jasmine replied firmly. "I will not submit to being searched based on a false accusation." The situation was spiraling out of control. Other passengers began scanning the floor and between seats, ostensibly helping to look for the missing watch. Suddenly, a male voice called out from 2 rows behind. "I found something," announced Victor Hayes, a middle-aged businessman in an expensive suit. He bent down and emerged holding an elegant diamond-encrusted watch. It was under seat 1A. The seat this lady was trying to claim. Jasmine stared in disbelief. The implication was clear and deliberate. The watch had supposedly fallen from her possession as she argued over the seat. But she knew with absolute certainty that this was impossible. She had never touched the watch, had never even seen it until this moment. "This is ridiculous," she stated, looking directly at Captain Peterson. "That watch was planted. I'm being set up." Eleanor gasped again, this time with indignation. "Are you calling me a liar? That watch cost $20,000. It was a gift from my late husband." Captain Peterson's expression had shifted from frustration to something more severe. He stepped away briefly to speak into a phone near the cockpit, then returned with a grim expression. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced to the cabin, "due to a security situation, our departure will be delayed. Please remain in your seats until further notice." Within minutes, Two air marshals boarded the plane, Charles Wilson and Patricia Davis, both in plain clothes but with badges now visible. They approached the first-class cabin with purposeful strides. "We need you to come with us, ma'am," Officer Wilson stated to Jasmine, his tone leaving no room for negotiation. "On what grounds?" Jasmine questioned, though she already knew the answer. "Suspected theft," Officer Davis replied. "We need to investigate the matter further." Victor Hayes spoke up again from his seat. "I saw her hovering unusually close to the older lady when she boarded. Something seemed suspicious about her behavior from the start." Jasmine realized with growing horror that she was being deliberately targeted in what appeared to be a coordinated effort. When she reached for her phone to call her attorney, Officer Wilson stopped her. "We'll need to confiscate that for now," he said, taking her phone despite her protests. As they escorted her from the plane, Captain Peterson's voice came over the intercom. "This flight is grounded pending investigation of a security incident. We apologize for the inconvenience." The walk of shame through the aircraft was excruciating. Passengers stared openly, some with suspicion, others with pity, as Jasmine was led out by the air marshals. She held her head high despite the humiliation, acutely aware that this treatment was not about a watch or a seat. It was about who she was and the assumptions made based on her appearance. In the jetway, Officer Davis took her arm to guide her toward a security door. "This way, please." Jasmine complied but couldn't help flashing back to similar experiences throughout her life, being followed in high-end stores, questioned about her presence in exclusive spaces, asked to show extra identification when her white colleagues were not. The common thread was always the same. Despite her accomplishments, her intelligence, her wealth, she was still viewed through the lens of suspicion because of her skin color. As they led her to a small, windowless room in the airport security area, Jasmine found herself separated from her belongings and the outside world. The door closed behind her with a decisive click, and she was left alone to contemplate how quickly a routine business trip had devolved into a nightmare of racial profiling and false accusations. Sitting on a hard metal chair under harsh fluorescent lighting, Jasmine thought about her grandmother Martha, who had warned her that success wouldn't shield her from prejudice, it would just change how it manifested. "When they can't keep you out because of your skin," Martha had said, "they'll find other ways to make you feel like you don't belong." Never had those words rung more true than in this moment, as Jasmine Washington, tech genius, billionaire, philanthropist, sat in an airport detention room, treated like a common thief because she had dared to stand her ground. The windowless security room felt deliberately designed to induce discomfort. A single metal table bolted to the floor. Two chairs, one occupied by Jasmine, the other empty and waiting. Fluorescent lights that buzzed incessantly overhead. The temperature was set uncomfortably low, a common tactic to wear down those being questioned. After 20 minutes of isolation, the door opened to admit TSA Officer Gregory Williams, a heavy-set man with a permanent scowl. He carried a folder but no coffee, no water, no gesture of basic courtesy. "Ms. Washington," he began, not bothering to introduce himself as he consulted the documents. His tone carried the weight of predetermined judgment. "You've created quite a situation." "I've created nothing," Jasmine replied evenly. "I was falsely accused after attempting to claim the seat I purchased." Officer Williams laughed without humor. "That's not what multiple witnesses are saying. We have statements from the captain, 2 flight attendants, and several passengers all indicating you were argumentative, disruptive, and potentially involved in theft." "Those statements are false," Jasmine maintained, her voice steady despite her growing frustration. "I need my phone to contact my attorney." "Phones are prohibited during security questioning," he replied dismissively. "Standard procedure." "It's also standard procedure to inform a detained individual of their rights," Jasmine countered. "Including the right to legal representation." Officer Williams' expression hardened. "This isn't an arrest, Ms. Washington. It's a security investigation. Different rules apply in airports." This was not entirely accurate, but he seemed confident she wouldn't know the difference. "I'd like to speak with your supervisor," Jasmine requested. "My supervisor is aware of the situation," he replied, rifling through papers without meeting her eyes. For the next 30 minutes, Officer Williams peppered Jasmine with repetitive questions, frequently interrupting her answers and circling back to the same points as if trying to catch her in a contradiction. His contempt was barely concealed behind a thin veneer of professionalism. "How did the watch end up under your assigned seat? Why were you recording on the aircraft against crew instructions? Do you have a history of confrontations during air travel? Why were you so insistent on that particular seat?" Jasmine answered each question calmly, repeatedly requesting her phone and legal representation. Her patience was wearing thin, but she understood the dangerous dynamics at play. Any display of frustration would only reinforce the negative stereotypes being projected onto her. The interrogation was interrupted when the door opened again. A woman in a crisp suit entered, her FBI credentials displayed on her belt. "Agent Jennifer Reynolds," she introduced herself briskly. "I'll take it from here, Officer Williams." Williams seemed reluctant to leave but eventually gathered his papers and exited with a final suspicious glance at Jasmine. Agent Reynolds took the vacated seat. Her demeanor was professional but no less skeptical than Williams had been. "Ms. Washington, I need to understand exactly what happened on that aircraft." "I'd be happy to explain again," Jasmine replied, "after I've contacted my attorney." "That would certainly be your right," Agent Reynolds acknowledged, "if you were under arrest. At this point, we're simply investigating a security incident and a theft allegation." Jasmine recognized the tactic but decided to try a different approach. "Agent Reynolds, before we continue, may I ask a question?" Reynolds nodded cautiously. "Has anyone checked the surveillance footage from the gate area and aircraft boarding? It would clearly show I never came near Eleanor Price's watch." A flicker of something, perhaps uncertainty, crossed Reynolds' face. "Airport surveillance is being reviewed." "And the first-class cabin footage?" Jasmine pressed. "Every commercial aircraft has security cameras. Those recordings are." Reynolds paused. "Currently unavailable." "Unavailable or inconvenient?" Jasmine asked quietly. The question hung in the air, unanswered. Reynolds changed tactics. "Multiple witnesses have provided consistent statements about your behavior." "Have they?" Jasmine leaned forward slightly. "Did Eleanor Price mention she boarded before me despite my priority status? Did Flight Attendant Miller explain why she repeatedly checked my legitimate boarding pass? Did Captain Peterson clarify why he immediately assumed I was the problem without investigating? Did Victor Hayes disclose his relationship to Eleanor?" Relationship? Reynolds' interest was piqued despite herself. "That's for your investigation to discover," Jasmine replied strategically. "But I suggest you look closely at the connections between today's witnesses before accepting their coordinated statements." Reynolds studied Jasmine with new intensity. "You seem very confident for someone in your position." "My position is that of a falsely accused person with nothing to hide," Jasmine stated. "Unlike others involved in this incident." The agent made several notes before asking, "What exactly do you do for a living, Ms. Washington?" "I'm the founder and CEO of Neurotech." Reynolds looked up sharply, recognition finally dawning. "The AI medical diagnostics company?" "The same." "You're claiming to be Jasmine Washington, the billionaire tech entrepreneur." "I'm not claiming anything. I am Jasmine Washington." Reynolds' skepticism remained evident. "We'll need to verify that." "By all means," Jasmine replied. "Though this entire situation might have been avoided if my identity had been the determining factor in how I was treated. But we both know that wasn't the case, don't we, Agent Reynolds?" Before Reynolds could respond, her phone buzzed. She checked the message with a frown. "Something interesting?" Jasmine inquired. "We've just received an anonymous call claiming a dangerous individual was removed from the flight, Reynolds revealed, watching Jasmine's reaction closely. Jasmine's expression remained composed. How convenient. The accusations escalate as each one fails to stick. Reynolds stood abruptly. I need to step out briefly. Can I get you anything? Water? My phone and my constitutional rights would be preferable, Jasmine replied. But water would be a start. Left alone again, Jasmine considered her options. The situation was clearly orchestrated, but to what end? Simple racism seemed too straightforward an explanation for the elaborate nature of the setup. There was something more calculated at work. When Reynolds returned with a bottle of water, her demeanor had subtly shifted. Ms. Washington, you mentioned knowledge of aviation regulations earlier. You seem well versed in legal matters as well. I run an $11 billion company, Agent Reynolds. Legal literacy is a necessity, not a luxury. And if I were to verify your identity right now, you'd discover you're participating in a harassment campaign against one of the country's most successful technology entrepreneurs, Jasmine stated matter-of-factly. A black woman who refused to give up her seat to a white passenger who wanted it, then was framed for theft when she wouldn't comply. The historical parallels aren't subtle. Something in Reynolds' expression changed, a dawning realization of the potential magnitude of the situation. I'll need some time to make additional inquiries, she said. While you do, Jasmine replied, I suggest you consider the legal implications of continuing to detain me without evidence or representation. The longer this continues, the more it appears to be clear-cut discrimination rather than legitimate security concerns. As Reynolds left the room again, Jasmine felt the first shift in the power dynamic. She had planted seeds of doubt, introduced complexity where her accusers had tried to create a simple narrative of guilt. It wasn't freedom, not yet, but it was the beginning of reclaiming control in a situation designed to strip it from her. The next move would determine whether justice or prejudice would prevail. When Agent Reynolds returned to the interrogation room, her demeanor had subtly changed. The skepticism remained, but it was now tinged with something new, caution. Ms. Washington, she began, I've confirmed some aspects of your identity. Given the circumstances, I'm willing to allow you one phone call while we continue our investigation. Jasmine nodded, accepting the small victory. Thank you. Most people in her position would immediately call their attorney. Reynolds clearly expected this, already preparing to deal with legal obstacles to her investigation. But Jasmine had a different strategy in mind. When handed her phone, she dialed not her lawyer, but Amanda Foster, her company's head of security. The call connected after one ring. Amanda, it's Jasmine. Protocol Indigo. O'Hare Airport, security holding in Terminal B. Her voice was calm but authoritative. Reynolds watched with growing confusion as Jasmine ended the call after just 15 seconds. That was unusually brief for a legal consultation, the agent observed. It wasn't my attorney, Jasmine replied. It was my head of security, former FBI Director Amanda Foster. Reynolds' eyes widened slightly at the name. Amanda Foster was a legend in federal law enforcement circles before transitioning to the private sector 3 years ago. What exactly is Protocol Indigo? Reynolds asked, trying to maintain her composure. It's our response to situations exactly like this one, Jasmine explained. In approximately 10 minutes, several things will happen simultaneously. I thought you should be prepared. True to Jasmine's word, exactly 9 minutes later, Reynolds' phone rang. The agent answered, her expression shifting from confusion to concern as she listened. After a brief conversation, she ended the call and stared at Jasmine with new respect. That was my supervisor, Reynolds said. Apparently, the FBI director himself is inquiring about this case. That would be the first step of Protocol Indigo, Jasmine confirmed. Amanda has extensive connections. Within the next 15 minutes, the small interrogation room became the eye of a rapidly expanding storm. Reynolds received 4 more calls in quick succession, each seemingly more urgent than the last. Jasmine sat quietly, watching the transformation with composed satisfaction. "You have some powerful friends, Ms. Washington," Reynolds finally acknowledged. "Not friends," Jasmine corrected. "Resources. There's a difference." Soon, the door opened to admit a senior FBI official who whispered urgently to Reynolds. When they finished their hushed conversation, Reynolds turned back to Jasmine with a completely transformed demeanor. "Ms. Washington, I've been informed that we've obtained surveillance footage from multiple sources that may be relevant to your situation." "I'm glad to hear it," Jasmine replied evenly. Reynolds hesitated before continuing. "The footage appears to show Mrs. Price removing a watch from her own wrist and placing it in her handbag before boarding. Later footage shows her passing something to Mr. Hayes in the jet bridge. Most significantly, there's clear video of Mr. Hayes bending down near seat 1A when passengers were distracted by your conversation with the captain." "So the watch was planted," Jasmine stated. "It wasn't a question." "It appears that way," Reynolds admitted. "We're also reviewing footage from previous flights. This may not be the first incident of its kind involving these individuals." Through Amanda's connections and Neuroteca's resources, comprehensive background checks were rapidly compiled on everyone involved in the incident. The results painted a disturbing picture that Reynolds now reluctantly shared with Jasmine. Eleanor Price has been involved in 3 previous incidents of reported theft on flights, always targeting well-dressed minorities in premium cabins. Each case was settled privately with the airlines, Reynolds explained. Victor Hayes is not merely an unrelated passenger, he's her son-in-law and has a history of insurance fraud charges that were mysteriously dropped 5 years ago. The web of deception extended further. Flight attendant Rebecca Miller had been investigated twice for accepting bribes to participate in passenger disputes, though no charges were ever filed. Captain Peterson's personnel file contained 3 formal complaints of discriminatory treatment toward minority passengers and crew members, all handled internally by the airline without public disclosure. Most damning of all, Eleanor's phone records, obtained through proper legal channels thanks to Amanda's swift action, revealed a call placed to the airport security officer who had first detained Jasmine. The officer was a former colleague of Victor Hayes from their time working together at an insurance company. "It appears you were targeted as part of an elaborate scam," Reynolds concluded. "They likely intended to pressure the airline into a settlement to avoid negative publicity, while simultaneously filing an insurance claim for the allegedly stolen watch." "And you believe all this happened spontaneously?" Jasmine asked. "That they coincidentally chose me as their target?" Reynolds hesitated. "We're still investigating how you were selected." "I think we both know why I was selected, Agent Reynolds," Jasmine said quietly. "I fit a profile they assumed would be easy to exploit and quick to settle. A black woman traveling alone, even one in first class, is still viewed as vulnerable and less credible. They didn't count on who I actually am." Reynolds had the grace to look uncomfortable. "The evidence suggests a pattern of behavior targeting minority passengers, yes. Were you surprised by this turn of events? Comment number 1 if you suspected Eleanor and her accomplices from the beginning, or number 2 if this revelation caught you off guard. Like and subscribe if you're eager to see justice served in this unbelievable true story. What would you do if you discovered you'd been targeted by an elaborate scam like this? How far would you go to clear your name and hold the perpetrators accountable? Let's see what happened next in Jasmine's fight for justice. The atmosphere in the airport security area transformed dramatically over the next 2 hours. The small, austere interrogation room where Jasmine had been held was abandoned in favor of an executive conference room in the airport administration section. FBI agents moved with purpose through the corridors, and airline officials who had been dismissive hours earlier now hovered anxiously, offering coffee, food, and profuse apologies. The case had been officially transferred from local airport security to the FBI, with Agent Reynolds reassigned as a liaison rather than lead investigator. The Bureau had dispatched a senior team specialized in civil rights violations and interstate fraud schemes, a clear indication of how seriously they were now taking the incident. Eleanor Price, Victor Hayes, and flight attendant Rebecca Miller had been discreetly removed from the aircraft and separated for questioning. Captain Peterson was summoned from the cockpit and informed that he was suspended pending a full investigation. The remaining passengers were deplaned and accommodated on other flights, with carefully worded explanations about a security protocol review, rather than the true nature of the events. In the conference room, Jasmine finally made the call she had initially been denied, to her legal team. Within 30 minutes, Michelle Carter, the brilliant attorney who had helped Jasmine navigate numerous corporate acquisitions and patent disputes, arrived at the airport, having diverted her private jet from a meeting in Detroit. "They picked the wrong black woman to mess with," Michelle commented after being briefed on the situation, her voice containing equal measures of outrage and professional determination. "We're going to make sure this never happens to anyone else." Lawrence Richards, the airline's CEO, joined the rapidly expanding meeting via video conference, his face ashen as he was briefed on the situation. "Ms. Washington, I cannot begin to express how deeply sorry we are for this inexcusable incident. I assure you that everyone involved will be held accountable, and we are committed to making this right." Jasmine listened to his practiced corporate apology with measured skepticism. "Mr. Richards, I'm less interested in your apologies than in your actions. This incident reflects systemic issues within your company culture, issues that affect countless travelers who don't have my resources or connections." The CEO nodded solemnly. "You're absolutely right. We clearly have significant work to do, and I would welcome your input on how we can make meaningful changes." As the day progressed, the full extent of the scheme began to emerge through interrogations and evidence recovery. Eleanor and Victor had executed similar scams on at least 7 previous occasions, targeting well-dressed minorities in first-class or business-class cabins on various airlines. Their method was consistent: Eleanor would claim a seat that wasn't hers, create a confrontation when challenged, and then accuse the legitimate passenger of theft. Victor would discover the allegedly stolen item in a location that implicated the target. Most victims had settled quickly, eager to avoid prolonged public humiliation and legal entanglements, especially when faced with multiple witnesses supporting the false narrative. The settlements, combined with fraudulent insurance claims for the supposedly stolen items, had netted the pair over $300,000 in the past 2 years alone. Flight attendant Rebecca's involvement had been secured through payments of $5,000 per successful operation. Money she claimed she needed for her mother's medical treatments. Captain Peterson hadn't been directly involved in the scam but had a documented history of bias that made him the perfect unwitting accomplice, reliably siding with white passengers in disputes without proper investigation. As this information was being compiled, Jasmine's situation had begun generating significant attention outside the airport. Despite attempts to keep the incident contained, footage from passengers' phones had emerged online showing portions of the confrontation and Jasmine being escorted off the plane. Without context, these clips painted a misleading picture, and social media was already buzzing with speculation. Nuriteka's stock price took an immediate hit, dropping 3% as rumors circulated about its CEO being detained at O'Hare. Jasmine's team worked quickly to counter the narrative, but the damage control process had just begun. Then something unexpected happened. Passengers from the flight began coming forward with their own accounts, not to condemn Jasmine, but to support her. A college professor seated in economy had recorded Eleanor and Victor exchanging the watch in the jet bridge. A flight attendant from another crew revealed that Rebecca had approached her months earlier about participating in easy money schemes involving passenger disputes. Most significantly, 3 other travelers of color contacted the airline with stories disturbingly similar to Jasmine's, describing encounters with the same individuals using the same tactics on different routes. The hashtag #StandWithJasmine began trending as the true story emerged, fueled by outrage over the blatant targeting of a successful black businesswoman. What had been intended to humiliate and extort her was instead becoming a powerful rallying point for discussions about racial profiling in travel and other premium spaces. When security footage from the aircraft boarding process was anonymously leaked online, showing clear evidence of the watch being planted, public opinion shifted decisively in Jasmine's favor. The airline's social media accounts were flooded with messages from angry customers demanding accountability and threatening boycotts. By evening, Jasmine was formally cleared of all accusations. Eleanor, Victor, and Rebecca were taken into custody facing federal charges including fraud, false accusations, civil rights violations, and conspiracy. Captain Peterson, while not arrested, was suspended without pay pending a comprehensive review of his conduct throughout his career with the airline. In the conference room that had become a command center for the rapidly evolving situation, Jasmine conferred with Michelle and her corporate team about next steps. The MediSolutions acquisition meeting, the original purpose of her trip to Atlanta, had been rescheduled with profuse apologies from the healthcare company. The CEO called personally, Benjamin reported, having joined the team via video conference from Chicago. He said, and I quote, "After seeing how Ms. Washington handles adversity, we're more convinced than ever that she's exactly the kind of leader we want to partner with." Despite this positive development, Jasmine remained focused on the broader implications of the day's events. "This isn't just about me," she told her team. "It's about every person who's been profiled, humiliated, or falsely accused because of how they look. We have a platform and resources that most victims don't have. We need to use them." Michelle nodded in agreement. "We're already drafting legal strategies. This could be a landmark case for passenger rights and anti-discrimination protocols in the airline industry." As evening fell, Jasmine finally prepared to leave the airport. Not on the original flight she had booked, but on a private jet arranged by the airline CEO as part of his desperate attempt at damage control. Before departing, she received one more visitor, Agent Reynolds. "Ms. Washington," Reynolds began, her professional demeanor now tempered with genuine respect. "I owe you an apology. I made assumptions when I should have asked questions. I saw what I expected to see rather than what was actually happening." Jasmine considered the agent thoughtfully. "That's how bias works, Agent Reynolds. It's not always malicious. Often it's just the path of least resistance, accepting the narrative that confirms what we've been conditioned to believe." Reynolds nodded solemnly. "I'd like to learn from this. The Bureau is establishing a task force to review similar cases nationwide, and I've been asked to participate. Your perspective would be invaluable." "Send me the details," Jasmine replied. "My experience is just one of many, but if it helps create meaningful change, some good can come from today's events." As she finally boarded the private jet that would take her to Atlanta, Jasmine reflected on her grandmother's wisdom once again. Martha Washington had taught her that success wouldn't shield her from prejudice, but it would give her the resources to fight back, not just for herself, but for others who shared her experiences without her advantages. Today had proven both parts of that lesson true. The battle was far from over, but for the first time since the confrontation began, Jasmine allowed herself to feel something beyond strategic calculation and controlled composure. She felt vindicated. 3 weeks after the incident, Jasmine sat in her office overlooking the Chicago skyline, reviewing the latest developments in what the media had dubbed Seatgate. The aftermath had spread far beyond her personal experience, triggering consequences that rippled through the airline industry, law enforcement, and public discourse about racial profiling. Eleanor Price, Victor Hayes, and Rebecca Miller had been formally charged with multiple federal offenses. The investigation had expanded to include their previous scams, with prosecutors uncovering a pattern of targeting at least 20 minority passengers over 3 years. What had begun as a seemingly isolated incident had revealed a sophisticated criminal enterprise. "They're offering a plea deal," Michelle informed Jasmine during their morning briefing. "The prosecutors have a solid case, but trials are unpredictable and expensive." "What are the terms?" Jasmine asked. Eleanor and Victor would serve 18 months in federal prison, pay restitution to all identified victims, and cooperate in identifying other accomplices across different airlines, Michelle explained. Rebecca would get probation in exchange for her complete cooperation. Jasmine considered this information carefully. And if they don't accept? They face up to 7 years if convicted on all counts. Their lawyer is strongly advising them to take the deal. The criminal proceedings represented only one aspect of the fallout. The airline had been forced to confront its institutional failures in dramatic fashion. Lawrence Richards, the CEO who had initially offered effusive apologies, announced a comprehensive anti-bias training program for all staff, from executives to ground crew. An independent review board was established to examine past complaints of discriminatory treatment, with financial compensation offered to verified victims. Captain Peterson had not accepted his suspension quietly. He appeared on several conservative news programs claiming he was being made a scapegoat for following standard security protocols. His defense crumbled spectacularly when internal emails surfaced showing a history of derogatory comments about minority passengers and crew members. The airline terminated his employment immediately, issuing yet another public apology. "His emails were worse than we could have imagined," Benjamin remarked, reviewing the latest media coverage. He actually referred to first class as being invaded by people who don't belong there. Jasmine wasn't surprised. Explicit bias is easier to identify and address. It's the subtle, unconscious biases that do the most damage because they're harder to prove and confront. This understanding had informed her response to the incident. Rather than focusing solely on individual accountability, Jasmine had leveraged her platform to highlight systemic issues. She established the Equality in Transit Foundation with a $50 million personal donation, dedicated to combating discrimination in all forms of transportation and public accommodation. The foundation's first initiative launches next month, Jasmine told her team. "We're creating an app that allows travelers to document and report discriminatory treatment in real time, with direct connections to legal resources and advocacy groups." The business impact of the incident had evolved in unexpected ways. Nureteca's stock, which had initially dropped when misleading footage emerged, had rebounded dramatically as the full story came to light. Investors and customers responded positively to Jasmine's poised handling of the crisis and her commitment to broader social change. The MediSolutions acquisition closed yesterday, Benjamin reported with satisfaction. $500 million, exactly as we projected. Their board specifically mentioned your grace under pressure as a decisive factor in moving forward. Perhaps most surprisingly, Agent Jennifer Reynolds had become an unlikely ally. After their final conversation at the airport, Reynolds had taken Jasmine's words to heart. She requested assignment to the FBI's newly formed task force on bias in transportation security and reached out to Jasmine for guidance on restructuring training protocols. Agent Reynolds called again, Benjamin noted. "The Bureau wants you to speak at their leadership conference next month about identifying and countering implicit bias in security operations." "Schedule it," Jasmine decided. Change happens from within systems, not just by criticizing them from the outside. As public interest in the case continued, apologies began arriving from unexpected sources. Several passengers who had witnessed the incident but remained silent came forward with regrets about their inaction. The most notable was a well-known business executive who had been seated across the aisle. "I saw what was happening but told myself it wasn't my problem," he wrote in a public letter that went viral. "My silence made me complicit in an injustice that I would have immediately recognized if I had been the target. I'm committing to never being a passive bystander again." Not all responses were supportive. A vocal minority accused Jasmine of leveraging her wealth and connections to blow a minor dispute out of proportion. Online trolls questioned whether the incident was as racially motivated as she claimed, suggesting she had manipulated the situation for publicity or financial gain. Captain Peterson's public apology, delivered during a network television interview, fell into this category of dubious sincerity. "If Ms. Washington felt targeted because of her race, I regret that perception," he stated, employing the classic non-apology that placed the burden on the victim's perception rather than his actions. His true feelings became clear when private emails leaked showing him complaining to colleagues about being sacrificed on the altar of political correctness and referring to Jasmine with derogatory terms. The airline, already working to repair its damaged reputation, immediately terminated all remaining financial obligations to him, including his pension. 6 months after the incident, Jasmine received an unexpected request. The White House invited her to participate in a transportation equity summit, focusing on eliminating discrimination in all forms of travel. The invitation recognized her not just as a victim of profiling, but as a leader in creating meaningful solutions. As the summit approached, Neuratech launched a groundbreaking security technology designed specifically to prevent profiling at airports. The system used advanced algorithms to ensure that random security checks were truly random, rather than disproportionately targeting specific racial or ethnic groups. Several major airports implemented pilot programs, with promising initial results. In perhaps the most unexpected development, Eleanor Price reached out from prison with an offer to provide information about a larger network of individuals running similar scams targeting wealthy minorities. Her motivation appeared to be a reduced sentence, but the information could potentially help dozens of other victims seek justice. "Should I take the meeting?" Jasmine asked Michelle during their weekly legal review. "Professionally, I'd say yes, her information could be valuable," Michelle replied. "Personally, I wouldn't blame you for refusing." Jasmine considered the question thoughtfully. "Schedule it. This was never about revenge. It's about creating change." As the meeting date approached, Jasmine found herself reflecting on the complex question of forgiveness versus accountability. She had no interest in perpetuating a cycle of punishment, but neither would she allow harmful behavior to continue without consequences. Finding the balance between justice and mercy was a challenge that extended far beyond her personal situation. The incident that began with a stolen airplane seat had expanded into something far larger than Jasmine could have anticipated. What was intended to humiliate and exploit her had instead become a catalyst for examination and change within systems that had long needed reform. The journey wasn't complete, but the direction was clear: forward, toward a world where people were judged by their character rather than their color. The road ahead would not be easy, but Jasmine Washington had never shied away from difficult paths. As her grandmother had often reminded her, when you can't find the right door, build your own and hold it open for others to follow. 6 months later, Jasmine Washington stood in the familiar terminal of O'Hare International Airport, preparing to board a flight to Atlanta. This wasn't just any trip, it was a deliberate retracing of the journey that had been so dramatically interrupted half a year earlier. Same airline. Same route. Even the same departure time. But everything else had changed. The gate agent smiled warmly as she scanned Jasmine's boarding pass. "Good morning, Ms. Washington. It's an honor to have you flying with us today." The respect wasn't just because of her billionaire status, which had been irrelevant during her previous experience, but because of the changes her ordeal had inspired. Jasmine had become a reluctant symbol of resilience and reform, her name now associated with the most comprehensive anti-discrimination initiative in the airline industry's history. As she walked down the jet bridge, she noted the newly installed cameras with their small but visible signs: "For everyone's safety and fair treatment, this area is monitored." These weren't just security measures but accountability tools, direct results of the policy changes she had advocated for. The aircraft door was staffed by a flight attendant named James, who welcomed her aboard with genuine warmth. The first-class cabin looked the same physically, but the atmosphere felt markedly different. The crew moved with a new awareness, their training on unconscious bias evident in their interactions with all passengers. Jasmine took her seat, 1A, just as before, and settled in, experiencing a complex mixture of emotions. This symbolic journey was both personal closure and public statement. The last 6 months had brought significant developments in the case that had come to define a moment in her life. Eleanor Price and Victor Hayes had been sentenced to 18 months in federal prison after accepting the plea deal. Their cooperation had led to the identification of similar scam operations in 3 other major airports, resulting in additional arrests and a formal FBI investigation into organized fraud targeting minority travelers. Rebecca Miller received 3 years of probation and community service in exchange for her testimony. Her claims of financial desperation to pay for her mother's medical bills proved partially true, though it didn't excuse her willing participation in the scheme. As part of her rehabilitation, she now volunteered with a nonprofit that helped families navigate medical billing challenges, using her first-hand knowledge of how financial pressure could lead to poor decisions. Captain Douglas Peterson's attempt to rehabilitate his image had failed spectacularly. After his prejudiced emails became public, he faced not just termination but a professional reckoning. The Pilots Association distanced themselves from his views, and his commercial flying career effectively ended. Last Jasmine heard, he was working as a flight instructor at a small regional school, still in aviation but far from the prestigious captain's position he had abused. The courthouse proceedings had been emotional for everyone involved. During the sentencing hearing, several other victims of Eleanor and Victor's schemes had delivered powerful impact statements. A black surgeon described missing a critical medical conference. A Latino executive detailed how the false accusation had triggered anxiety that affected his ability to travel for months afterward. An Indian tech entrepreneur explained how the public humiliation had damaged her company's reputation. Jasmine's own statement had focused not on punishment but on acknowledging harm and creating change. The greatest penalty for these actions isn't measured in prison time, she had told the court. It's in recognizing how many lives were damaged by the exploitation of prejudice for personal gain, and in committing to a world where such exploitation is no longer possible. After the sentencing, Jasmine had made the difficult decision to meet with Eleanor at the minimum security facility where she was serving her time. The conversation had been tense but ultimately productive. Eleanor never offered a genuine apology, her narcissism prevented true remorse, but her information about similar scams operating across multiple airlines proved valuable in preventing others from experiencing what Jasmine had endured. More meaningful than any individual accountability was the systemic change that had resulted from the incident. The airline had completely overhauled its training procedures, implementing mandatory quarterly anti-bias education for all customer-facing staff. A diverse passenger advisory board now reviewed policies and complaints, ensuring multiple perspectives informed decision-making. Jasmine's Equality in Transit Foundation had grown beyond its initial focus, partnering with civil rights organizations to address discrimination across all transportation sectors. The Foundation's reporting app had documented over 2,000 incidents in its first 4 months, creating the most comprehensive database of transportation discrimination ever compiled. This data was already informing policy changes at the federal level. Most personally satisfying to Jasmine was the mentorship program she had established for young black women interested in technology and entrepreneurship. The program provided not just education and funding but guidance on navigating spaces where they might be the only person who looked like them in the room. Success despite barriers is admirable, Jasmine often told her mentor. Success that removes those barriers for others is transformative. As the flight prepared for departure, Jasmine was surprised to see a familiar face boarding the plane. Agent Jennifer Reynolds, now Deputy Director of the FBI's Transportation Equity Task Force, took the seat across the aisle. "Ms. Washington," she greeted with a nod of recognition. "I didn't expect to see you on this flight." "Symbolic journeys matter," Jasmine replied. "I understand you've been doing important work with the task force." Reynolds nodded. "Your experience changed my perspective in ways that all my formal training never did. We've completely redesigned how we approach passenger complaints and security responses. The number of civil rights violations in airports has dropped 26% in the regions where we've implemented the new protocols." Their conversation was interrupted by the captain's announcement, "Good morning, passengers. This is Captain Sofia Rodriguez welcoming you aboard Flight 1857 to Atlanta. My first officer today is David Chen, and we're supported by our outstanding cabin crew led by James Taylor." The airline had made a point of promoting qualified women and people of color to leadership positions, not as tokenism but as recognition of talent that had previously been overlooked or undervalued. Captain Rodriguez was a 15-year veteran pilot whose career advancement had accelerated after the company's diversity initiatives removed subtle barriers in the promotion process. As the aircraft pushed back from the gate, Jasmine reflected on the acquisition deal that she had originally been traveling to negotiate. The partnership with MediSolutions had exceeded all expectations, with Neuroteca's AI diagnostic tools now implemented in over 200 hospitals nationwide. The technology had already saved an estimated 3,000 lives by enabling earlier detection of otherwise missed conditions. This success carried particular meaning because it fulfilled the promise Jasmine had made to her grandmother years ago, to create technology that helped people who might otherwise be overlooked by the healthcare system. Martha Washington hadn't lived to see her granddaughter's greatest achievements, but her influence remained at the core of everything Jasmine built. Midway through the flight, an incident in economy class caught Jasmine's attention. A flight attendant was engaged in what appeared to be a tense conversation with an elderly South Asian passenger. Without hesitation, Jasmine unbuckled her seatbelt and walked back to observe more closely. The issue was a language barrier. The passenger was trying to explain a medical dietary restriction but struggling with English. The flight attendant was becoming visibly frustrated despite her efforts to remain patient. Jasmine stepped forward. "Excuse me. I speak Hindi. May I help?" Both the passenger and flight attendant looked relieved. Through Jasmine's translation, the situation was quickly resolved. The passenger received an appropriate meal, and the flight attendant expressed genuine gratitude for the assistance. "Thank you, Ms. Washington," she said. "We're still working on our language diversity training. This is exactly why we need better systems." "Progress isn't perfection," Jasmine replied with a smile. "It's the willingness to acknowledge gaps and address them." As she returned to her seat, Jasmine noticed several passengers had recognized her and were watching with expressions ranging from admiration to curiosity. Her experience had made her a reluctant public figure, but she had chosen to use that visibility purposefully rather than retreat from it. When the flight landed in Atlanta, Jasmine felt a sense of completion. The journey that had been so dramatically interrupted 6 months earlier had finally reached its intended destination. But she had arrived as a different person, stronger, more determined, and with a clearer understanding of her purpose beyond business success. The acquisition deal that she had missed due to the incident had actually led to better terms when renegotiated. Neurotech had expanded its reach beyond what she had initially envisioned, with new projects focusing specifically on reducing healthcare disparities in underserved communities. As Jasmine exited the plane, Captain Rodriguez was standing at the cockpit door. "It was an honor having you on board, Ms. Washington," she said. "Your work has made a difference for so many of us." "The work continues," Jasmine replied. "For all of us." Walking through Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport, Jasmine reflected on her grandmother's wisdom once more. Martha had always told her that true success wasn't measured by money or recognition but by the positive change you created in the world. By that measure, the painful incident 6 months ago, an attempt to humiliate and exploit her, had paradoxically contributed to her most meaningful success yet. Not because of what had happened to her, but because of how she had transformed that experience into action that benefited others. The journey wasn't over. Prejudice wouldn't disappear overnight. Systems wouldn't reform themselves without continued pressure and accountability. But meaningful progress had been made, and Jasmine Washington was more committed than ever to continuing that work, one seat, one flight, one policy change at a time. This story teaches us that discrimination persists at every level of society, regardless of wealth or status. It shows how deeply rooted racial bias can be, hiding within systems and individuals who may not even recognize their prejudice. Jasmine's experience demonstrates that standing firm against injustice requires courage, especially when facing coordinated opposition. The story reveals how quickly people make assumptions based on race rather than facts. It illustrates the burden that many Black Americans carry daily, having to be exceptionally composed and knowledgeable just to receive fair treatment. We see how privilege operates in subtle ways, from who gets believed by default to who must prove their worthiness to occupy certain spaces. Most importantly, this narrative shows that meaningful change comes not just from exposing individual bad actors, but from reforming the systems that enable discrimination. Real progress happens when those with power and resources use them to create pathways for others, turning personal pain into collective progress. Have you ever witnessed or experienced racial discrimination while traveling? Share your story in the comments below. How would you have responded in Jasmine's situation? Comment, "Justice," if you believe companies should face serious consequences for allowing discrimination to occur. If this story moved you, please hit the like button and subscribe to our channel for more powerful racism stories that expose hard truths and inspire change. Share this video with someone who needs to understand how racism operates in modern America. Thank you for listening with an open heart, and remember, your voice matters in the fight against injustice.